There is a fatal flaw in the new California listing agreement, and it's located in paragraph 2, line C2. It's the additional compensation to the seller's broker for unrepresented buyers. This is the only other place in the listing agreement where the broker charges the seller commission besides line C1. Now, in my listing agreement tutorial, I recommended checking that box and writing in a number, maybe 1%. I still think agents should do that, as they should charge whenever and wherever they can. However, I also see the glaring issue this creates. Now, I don't know C.A.R's official reason for putting this line in there. I mean, they can't have the dual agency compensation on a listing agreement anymore, so maybe this is the reason they think it's the next best thing to do this. I really hope that's not the case, so I prefer to believe that this is just bonus compensation for the hassle of communicating with unrepresented buyers. Let's call it the needy buyer clause. But whatever the reason it's there, I now believe that this is bad and needs to be removed from the next version of the listing agreement. Here's why. Realtors are now required to get their buyer to sign a representation agreement. This ultimatum will motivate some buyers to contact the listing agent directly, hoping to sidestep signing the representation agreement. Now, in a perfect world, a listing agent would tell a buyer that they too require a buyer to sign a representation agreement, so there is no loophole. At that point, a buyer will have to decide to sign a representation agreement or go unrepresented. Most buyers that try to go unrepresented will quickly realize they can't, unless a listing agent helps them. In this scenario, the unrepresented buyer compensation incentivizes a listing agent to unofficially help a buyer in order to pocket the compensation on line C2. Some listing agents will game this system, which will undermine buyers' agents and rob buyers of proper representation. So now I see it as less of a needy buyer clause and more of a forbidden fruit clause. There's no dual agency unless the listing agent's name is on the purchase agreement as the buyer's agent. Any guidance a listing agent gives an unrepresented buyer is tainted. It can and will be used against a listing agent when a dispute arises. I'm certain this scenario will transpire and some buyer will feel like they got a raw deal for whatever reason and blame the listing agent. There will be documented evidence of the listing agent drafting forms or emailing the unrepresented buyer, and this will create some sort of tacit representation, and the listing agent will be punished. So here's my advice for agents on both sides of this. If you're the listing agent and the buyer refuses representation, then treat them with the same courtesy as the buyer's agent, but nothing more. Don't draft a purchase agreement. Don't guide them. That's not your job. If the buyer can't figure it out, then they need to hire someone. If you're a buyer's agent, then in your representation agreement presentation, you need to bring this up. You need to warn the buyer that there are opportunistic listing agents out there that will lead you, the buyer, to believe that they don't have to sign a representation agreement, and then they'll illegitimately represent you. The listing agent's fiduciary obligation lies with the seller, not you, the buyer. Unless the listing agent has you sign a representation agreement, it's a trap. Then give the buyer an analogy. Tell them, imagine you're in a divorce. Your spouse hires a divorce attorney and you go unrepresented to try to save money. Would you have your spouse's attorney write up the terms of your settlement? Would you have your spouse's attorney advise you who is entitled to what in the divorce? I don't think so. The buyer needs to know this so that they don't run into the arms of a listing agent exploiting line C2. And that's all I have to say about the forbidden fruit clause. Thank you for watching.